During the storm, his dog discovered a missing woman. The Navy SEAL's next move changed everything. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you want to support the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. Some storms reveal more than they destroy. Some discoveries change everything. And some men, no matter how far they run from their past, cannot ignore the call when innocence cries out for protection. What began as a routine walk during a November tempest became something else entirely. A rescue that would pull a broken warrior back into the fight he thought he'd left behind. The men who created this nightmare made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed no one would come looking. They didn't know about the soldier on the cliff. They didn't know about his partner. And they certainly didn't know that some oaths never expire. Crescent Bay, Oregon was the kind of place people came to disappear. Not in the sinister sense, though recent events would challenge that assumption, but in the intentional way of those seeking distance from lives grown too complicated, too painful, too loud. The town clung to the Pacific coastline like a barnacle to driftwood, population 800 and declining, surrounded on three sides by forests of Douglas fir and Sitka spruce, so dense they seemed to swallow sound itself. To the west, basalt cliffs dropped 200 feet to beaches of black sand, where the ocean arrived not in gentle waves, but in violent surges that shook the ground. November here was not a month, but an endurance test. The storms rolled in from the Gulf of Alaska with biblical fury, bringing rain measured not in inches, but in feet, winds that bent century-old trees parallel to the ground, and a darkness that settled over the landscape at 4 in the afternoon and didn't lift until nearly 9 the next morning. The town itself was a study in slow entropy. Logging had built Crescent Bay in the 1930s, sustained it through the 80s, then abandoned it when the mills closed and the jobs evaporated like morning fog. What remained was a main street of brick buildings, with fading painted advertisements for products no longer manufactured. A harbor where fishing boats outnumbered residents, and a population divided between those too stubborn to leave and those too poor to go. There was a resigned quality to the place, a collective acceptance that better days were past and the future held only managed decline. The nearest hospital was in Astoria, 40 minutes on good roads that became impassable during serious weather. The nearest city of any size was Portland, 4 hours south on Highway 101. A route that wound through mountains and along cliff edges with the kind of turns that made nervous drivers pull over and pray. 3 miles north of town, where the coast road narrowed to a single lane and the forest pressed close enough to scrape passing vehicles, a dirt turnoff led to a property that locals called the Harper Place, though the Harpers had been gone for 15 years. The cabin that stood there was never meant to be permanent. Some loggers' temporary shelter that had somehow survived decades of weather through stubbornness and good bones. It was a simple structure, more functional than comfortable, with plank walls weathered silver gray, a metal roof that drummed like artillery during rain, and windows that faced the ocean as if keeping watch for something that never quite arrived. No decoration softened its lines. No flowers brightened its perimeter. Nothing suggested that life here involved anything beyond mere existence. This was where Marcus Cole had come to forget. At 34, he looked older in the eyes and younger in the body, the contradiction of men whose profession involved extreme physical conditioning and extreme psychological cost. He stood 6'2", with the kind of build that came not from vanity training, but from functional necessity. 210 pounds of efficient muscle, broad through the shoulders, narrow at the waist, moving with an economy of motion that suggested every action had been calculated for maximum effect with minimum energy expenditure. His face was all hard angles and weathered tan, the kind of complexion earned through years under harsh suns in places that didn't appear on tourist maps. Dark hair cropped close to his skull showed premature gray at the temples, not the distinguished kind, but the earned kind, the stress kind. His hands told stories he never spoke aloud. Rope-scarred palms, knuckles that had been broken and healed slightly crooked, a fine network of scars across the backs that spoke of shrapnel and blade work. But it was his eyes that marked him as something other than just another veteran seeking solitude. They were the color of winter storms, gray-blue and constantly moving, processing information with the unconscious hypervigilance of someone whose survival had once depended on seeing threats before they materialized. Marcus Cole had served 12 years as a Navy SEAL, most of that time with Team 3, operating in places the news reported with vague terms like the region or overseas. He'd done the work without question, with pride even, believing in mission and brotherhood and the clean moral certainty of protecting his country from genuine threats. That certainty had died 8 months ago in Kandahar, in a compound that was supposed to house a high-value target, but instead held families. In an operation based on intelligence that was either catastrophically wrong or deliberately falsified. 6 men had entered that compound. Only Marcus walked out. The official report called it an ambush, praised his valor, awarded him medals he kept in a box he'd never opened. The unofficial reality was that he'd been the sole survivor of someone else's catastrophic failure, left alive to carry the weight of names that woke him at 3 a.m. Voices he still heard in quiet moments, faces that appeared in crowds that couldn't possibly contain them. He'd taken his discharge the moment it was offered, collected his dog, and driven until the roads ran out. Crescent Bay. A wasn't a destination so much as the place where he'd simply stopped moving. He paid cash for 6 months' rent on the cabin, took occasional construction work when money ran low, and spent his days in careful routines designed to fill hours without requiring thought or connection. He ran 10 miles every morning regardless of weather, chopped firewood until his shoulders burned, read paperback thrillers whose violence was sanitized and whose heroes always won, and spoke to exactly as many people as survival required, which was almost none. But he wasn't entirely alone. Titan weighed 95 pounds of muscle, bone, and loyalty, so absolute it bordered on mystical. The German Shepherd had the dark sable coat and amber eyes common to working lines, but everything else about him spoke to purpose beyond genetics. His left ear carried a notch from shrapnel in Helmand Province. His gait held the faintest hitch in his right rear leg from the same incident, and his eyes held the same hypervigilant quality as his handlers. Always scanning, always processing, always ready. He wasn't a pet, had never been a pet, would never be a pet. He was a partner, forged through 3 combat deployments as a military working dog specializing in explosive detection, trained to standards that exceeded most human soldiers, and bonded to Marcus through experiences that transcended the normal boundaries between species. They'd saved each other's lives more times than either could count, operated as a single unit, where communication required no words, only the slightest shift in posture or tone. Titan had his own diagnoses from his own military psychologists. Mild PTSD manifesting as noise sensitivity, startle responses to sudden sounds, vigilance bordering on paranoia. On paper, he was retired. In reality, he was simply redeployed to a different mission, keeping his handler alive when the enemy was memory and the battlefield was inside Marcus's own skull. The storm that arrived on the 3rd Tuesday of November was the kind that made even longtime residents nervous. Weather services issued warnings using terms like atmospheric river and bomb cyclone, predicting rainfall accumulations that would overwhelm drainage systems and winds that would down power lines across 3 counties. By noon, the sky had compressed into a uniform slate gray that merged seamlessly with the ocean, erasing the horizon and creating the disorienting sensation that the world had shrunk to only what existed within 100 yards. Rain didn't fall so much as materialize from the air itself, driven horizontal by winds that stripped leaves from trees and sent anything unsecured tumbling down empty streets. Marcus had spent the morning preparing with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd weathered far worse than Pacific storms. He'd secured shutters, moved firewood under cover, filled containers with water against the inevitable power outage, and laid in supplies that would last 2 weeks if roads became impassable. By early afternoon, with nothing left to prepare, he'd done what he always did when stillness threatened. He'd gone running. Not the usual 10 miles on accessible trails, but a punishing route along the cliff edge where wind tried to shove him toward the drop, and rain transformed the path into a slurry of mud and pine needles. Titan ran beside him, unbothered by conditions that would send sensible dogs seeking shelter, his coat streaming water, his tongue lolling in what might have been a grin. They were 3 miles out when Titan stopped, It wasn't a gradual halt, but an instantaneous transformation from motion to absolute stillness. The kind of response that Marcus's hindbrain recognized before his conscious mind processed it. The dog's ears swiveled forward, body going rigid, every line of his posture screaming alert. Marcus stopped immediately, hand dropping to his side where a weapon would have been if this were patrol, finding only empty space and the disorienting reminder that he wasn't there anymore, wasn't that person anymore, wasn't supposed to need to be ready for contact. What is it? The words were nearly stolen by wind, but Titan's ears flicked back momentarily, acknowledging. The dog took 3 steps toward the cliff edge, stopped again, released a sound that wasn't quite a bark, wasn't quite a whine. Something between the two that Marcus had learned to interpret as distress. The cliff here wasn't the sheer drop of points farther south, but a steep slope of loose rock and tenacious vegetation that tumbled down about 60 feet before leveling into a narrow shelf. Recent rains had destabilized sections, causing minor slides of mud and stone. Visibility through the downpour was maybe 20 feet. Marcus approached carefully, aware that the ground could give way, aware that Titan wouldn't alert to nothing, aware that his carefully constructed isolation was about to end. At first, he saw only disturbed earth, a fresh slide of mud and debris. Then the colors resolved into something that didn't belong. Blue fabric, pale skin, dark hair matted with mud. A woman, half buried in the mudslide, face down and completely still. Every instinct screamed at him to move, but training overrode instinct. He evaluated the terrain, identified stable approach routes, checked for ongoing slide danger. Only then did he descend, boots finding purchase on exposed roots and rock, Titan following with the sure-footed confidence of a mountain goat. She was alive, barely. Marcus registered this in the first 3 seconds of assessment. Shallow breathing, weak pulse at the throat, skin cold enough to indicate severe hypothermia. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, inadequate for the conditions, soaked through and caked with mud. Her hands showed defensive wounds, knuckles abraded, nails broken. Zip tie marks circled both wrists, the plastic restraints themselves missing, but the damage unmistakable. This wasn't someone caught in a storm. This was someone who'd been left here. Marcus stripped off his waterproof jacket, wrapped it around her, then lifted her with the fireman's carry that was second nature, balancing her weight as he climbed back up. The unstable slope. Titan ranged ahead, testing the route, and somehow they made it to level ground without the cliff deciding to take them all down together. The run back to the cabin was 3 miles of nightmare, carrying 130 pounds of unconscious woman through conditions that had deteriorated from bad to dangerous. Winds strong enough now that forward progress required leaning into it. Rain so dense it was nearly impossible to distinguish path from forest. Titan led, somehow maintaining direction when Marcus could barely see 5 feet ahead, and 40 minutes that felt like hours later, they crashed through the cabin door into dim interior that felt tropical by comparison to outside. Marcus had treated hypothermia in the field, knew the protocols, knew the dangers of rewarming too quickly. He got her out of wet clothes with clinical efficiency, wrapped her in every dry blanket he owned, built the fire up until the cabin's interior became uncomfortably warm. Only then did he allow himself to truly look at her. She was perhaps 40, with features that would have been striking under better circumstances. Strong bone structure, silver hair that seemed premature given her apparent age, an athletic build that spoke to physical work rather than gym vanity. But it was the injuries that held his attention. Beyond the zip tie marks and defensive wounds, there was bruising around her throat, partially healed abrasions on her face, and, when he checked more carefully, what looked like boot print bruising on her ribs. This woman had been assaulted, restrained, and left to die. The timeline was at least 72 hours, judging by the healing stages of various injuries. She remained unconscious through the first hour, breathing growing stronger, color gradually returning to her skin. Marcus maintained watch with the patient vigilance of someone who'd done plenty of similar watches, monitoring vitals, adding warm, not hot, liquids when she began to show signs of returning consciousness, and trying very hard not to think about what circumstances had led to a woman being dumped on a cliffside during the worst storm of the season. Titan lay beside the makeshift bed Marcus had created near the fire, massive head resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the woman with an intensity that went beyond normal canine curiosity. Every few minutes, he'd release a soft whine, and once he carefully extended his muzzle to touch her hand where he had emerged from the blankets. It was the kind of gentle behavior he'd shown exactly once before, with a child they'd pulled from rubble in Ramadi, and Marcus felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Not his town, not his fight, not his problem. He'd repeat these words like a mantra when she woke up and told him whatever horror story had led her to that cliff. He'd help her contact whoever she needed to contact, make sure she was stable, and then return to his carefully constructed solitude. He'd done his part by not leaving her to die. That was enough. It had to be enough. Except Titan was looking at him with those amber eyes that had seen him through the worst moments of his life. And in that look was a judgment that transcended species. "You know better." She woke screaming, not the groggy confusion of someone emerging from natural sleep, but the violent panic of someone whose last conscious memory was terror. She thrashed against the blankets, eyes wide but unseeing, and would have thrown herself off the makeshift bed if Marcus hadn't been there to catch her shoulders, firm but not restraining. Voice low and steady, speaking words designed to anchor rather than command. "You're safe. You're inside. The storm can't reach you here. You're safe." It took nearly a minute for the words to penetrate, for her eyes to focus on his face, for the blind panic to transform into conscious fear. She jerked back from his touch, scrambling until her back hit the wall, breathing in ragged gasps that suggested the edge of hyperventilation. Titan moved then, not toward her but simply into her line of sight, lowering himself to the floor in the universal canine posture of non-threat, and somehow this succeeded where Marcus's words had not. Her breathing slowed fractionally. Her eyes tracked from the dog to Marcus and back, processing, evaluating. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, damaged, each word clearly painful. "Marcus Cole. That's Titan. We found you on the cliff. You've been unconscious for about 2 hours." He kept his distance, kept his hands visible, kept his voice level. "You need water. You need food. Then you need to tell me who did this to you." "I need..." She stopped, swallowed, tried again. "I need to know if my daughter is safe." The world tilted slightly. Daughter. Of course there was a daughter. There was always something that made walking away impossible. "Tell me her name. Tell me where she is. I'll confirm she's safe." "Sophie. Sophie Voss. She's 9. She should be with Mrs. Chen, our neighbor, at 42 Harbor Road." The words tumbled out with desperate speed. "She thinks I'm on a research trip. She can't know. She can't see me like this. Please." Marcus moved to his phone, one of the few concessions to modern life he'd maintained, and pulled up the local directory. Harbor Road was in town proper, a 10-minute drive under normal conditions, probably 20 in current weather. The phone had signal, barely, and he dialed the number listed for Chen, waited through 4 rings before an elderly voice answered with cautious suspicion. "Mrs. Chen, my name is Marcus Cole. I'm calling about Sophie Voss. Is she there with you?" A pause, then careful words. "Who wants to know?" "Her mother asked me to check. I have her here. She's been hurt, but she's going to be fine. She just needs to know Sophie's safe." Another pause, longer this time, then the sound of the phone being muffled. Distant conversation. And finally, "Sophie is here. She's fine. She's safe. Is Elena, Dr. Moss, is she really all right?" Marcus looked at the woman against his wall, wrapped in blankets, face showing the clear evidence of assault, and made a decision. She will be. Tell Sophie her. Mother will call her soon. Don't tell her anything else. He ended the call, met Elena's eyes. "She's safe. She's with Mrs. Chen. She thinks you're working." The relief that washed over her face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. Then it transformed into something harder, something that looked like rage, barely contained by exhaustion. "How long was I out there?" "Judging by your injuries and exposure, at least 3 days, maybe 4. "You want to tell me what happened?" She laughed, a sound without humor that ended in a cough that made her clutch her ribs. "You military?" The question shouldn't have surprised him. Something about the way he moved, spoke, held himself apparently still broadcast it even when he tried to fade into civilian anonymity. Was Navy. SEAL? At his fractional nod, something shifted in her expression. "Then maybe you'll actually believe me when I tell you the sheriff won't help, that he's part of it." Marcus felt the familiar weight settling across his shoulders, the one he'd been trying to escape for 8 months, the one that said this was about to become his problem whether he wanted it or not. Start at the beginning. Elena Voss was a marine biologist, which explained the weatherproof field clothes and the calloused hands. She'd moved to Crescent Bay 3 years ago, purchased the old lighthouse keeper's cottage on protected cliffside property, and dedicated herself to studying coastal erosion and ocean acidification. It was solitary work that suited her temperament after a divorce that had been ugly enough to send her looking for distance from her previous life in Seattle. The property was perfect, isolated, positioned for optimal ocean access, and cheap enough that her modest divorce settlement could cover it outright. 6 months ago, a man named Richard Dalton had appeared at her door with an offer to purchase. Cascade Development Corporation, he'd explained, was planning a luxury resort development, and her property was key to the project. The offer was generous, 3 times what she'd paid. She'd refused. She wasn't interested in selling, wasn't interested in seeing the coastline transformed into another playground for the wealthy. Wasn't interested in abandoning research that was producing significant data about environmental degradation. Dalton had smiled, assured her the offer would remain open, and left. 2 weeks later, her research equipment had been vandalized. The week after that, her car had been keyed. Then the threatening phone calls started. Anonymous, untraceable, always the same message. Sell or suffer consequences. She'd gone to Sheriff Brennan, who'd taken her statement with visible disinterest and done precisely nothing. The escalation had been methodical. Dead animals left on her porch, her research boat damaged, windows broken, and through it all, Dalton kept appearing with revised offers, each higher than the last, his smile never wavering even as the message became clear: accept the money or lose everything. 3 nights ago, I was working late at the cottage, compiling data. 4 men broke in. They had zip ties and duct tape. Her voice broke, steadied with visible effort. They told me Mr. Dalton was disappointed I hadn't accepted his generous offers, that I was being unreasonable, that examples needed to be made. They'd beaten her methodically, not with the rage of passion, but with the cold efficiency of professionals following orders. They demanded she sign property transfer documents she refused to sign. When she continued refusing, they discussed among themselves whether to simply eliminate her, decided that a body would raise too many questions, and settled on a compromise: dump her on the cliff during the storm, let exposure and the elements do the work. Call it a tragic accident of a researcher who'd ventured out in dangerous conditions. They threw me over. I managed to grab vegetation, slow the fall, but I couldn't climb back up. I tried to stay conscious, tried to find shelter, but everything just ended. Until I woke up here. Marcus processed the information with the cold, analytical part of his brain that still functioned like a tactical computer. Private security team, likely former military or law enforcement, operating with enough confidence to suggest they believe themselves immune to consequences. Local sheriff compromised or complicit. Target selected for isolation and lack of powerful allies. Textbook intimidation escalated to attempted murder. Not his town. Not his fight. The words sounded hollow even in his own head. Your research. Do you have copies? Backup data? Everything's cloud backed up. Why? Because if they went this far, your research isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous to them. What did you find? Elena met his eyes, and in hers, he saw the steel that had kept her alive through 3 days of exposure. Proof that Dalton's existing developments have been dumping industrial waste directly into protected waters. Proof that his environmental impact reports were falsified. Proof that at least 2 previous property owners who refused to sell had fatal accidents. I have documentation, water samples, financial records, enough to halt every project he has and put him in federal prison. And he knows you have it. He knows. Marcus looked at Titan, who looked back with those amber eyes that had never once failed to see through his excuses. He looked at Elena, wrapped in his blankets, bruised and battered but unbroken. He thought about a 9-year-old girl who thought her mother was on a research trip. He thought about men who believed they could terrorize and murder without consequence, simply because they had money and corrupt officials in their pockets. Not his town, not his fight, except it was. The moment Titan had found her, it had become his fight. Some things you couldn't walk away from, no matter how far you ran. Marcus spent the next hour transforming his cabin from refuge into fortress. He moved with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this before in places where the cost of inadequate preparation was measured in body bags. Elena watched from there. Bed, still too weak to do more than sit upright, as he repositioned furniture to create clear sight lines to all entry points, checked the integrity of door and window locks, and inventoried supplies with the clinical assessment of someone calculating siege sustainability. The weapons cache came from the locked storage under the floorboards, not an arsenal, but enough. A Sig Sauer P226. The sidearm he'd carried for 12 years and couldn't quite bring himself to surrender. A Remington 870 shotgun purchased legally from a sporting goods store in Astoria. Ammunition for both. A combat knife with a 7-inch blade that had saved his life in Kandahar. He checked each weapon with practiced efficiency, function smooth and familiar. Titan required different preparation. Marcus retrieved the dog's tactical vest from the same storage, a Kevlar weave designed to stop shrapnel and small-caliber rounds, with attachment points for camera and communication equipment he no longer possessed. The dog stood patiently as Marcus fitted it, the weight and pressure clearly familiar, and when it was secured, something shifted in Titan's bearing. He was no longer a pet playing at vigilance, but a working dog returned to purpose. "You're expecting them to come here." Elena's voice was stronger now, fueled by hot broth and the kind of adrenaline that came from having already survived the worst. "They left you to die. When your body doesn't turn up, they'll start looking. This cabin isn't secret. Anyone in town could tell them about the antisocial veteran on the cliff. They'll come to confirm you're dead or finish the job." Marcus spoke without looking up from his preparations, checking the shotgun's action. "Question is whether they come tonight or wait for the storm to clear." "How many?" "You said 4 took you. Assume at least that many. Possibly more if they're nervous. Former military or law enforcement, based on the professionalism you described. Armed, definitely. Trained, probably. Dangerous, absolutely." Elena absorbed this, then asked the question he'd been waiting for. "Can you stop them?" Marcus met her eyes. "Yes." The certainty in his voice wasn't arrogance, it was simple fact, delivered with the same inflection he might use to confirm the sky was gray or the ocean was wet. Elena seemed to understand this, nodding slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay down. Stay quiet. If shooting starts, you hit the floor and you don't move until I tell you it's over." He paused, considering. "Can you use a weapon?" "I've fired handguns at ranges. I'm not military, but I can point and shoot if I have to." Marcus retrieved the SIG, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed it to her. 15 rounds, 1 in the chamber when you reload it. Safety here. Point at what you want to stop. Pull the trigger until it stops. Don't fire unless you have no other choice, because once you start, there's no taking it back. She accepted the weapon with steady hands, checking it the way someone who'd had basic instruction would, and Marcus revised his assessment of her upward. Not helpless, not a victim waiting for rescue, a survivor who'd do what survival required. Meanwhile, across town, in a waterfront office that occupied the entire top floor of the only building in Crescent Bay, over 3 stories, Richard Dalton was receiving news he didn't appreciate. The office was an exercise in expensive minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Furniture that cost more than most local residents earned in a year. Abstract art whose value was measured more in status than aesthetics. Dalton stood at the windows, phone to his ear, Princeton class ring catching light as his hand tightened around the device. "What do you mean you haven't confirmed?" His voice held the particular quiet menace of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You had 3 days. 3 days of the worst storm this coast has seen in decades. She should be in the ocean by now, broken apart by rocks or dragged out by riptides. So tell me, Victor, why I'm hearing uncertainty in your voice." On the other end, Victor Reyes, 35, former Army MP until dishonorable discharge for excessive force, now head of Cascade Development's security operations, chose his words carefully. "The storm's been too severe for proper search. We've checked the dump site twice, no body. Could be she washed out to sea like we planned. Could be she crawled somewhere to die and we haven't found her yet. Could be she's alive." Dalton finished the sentence with surgical precision. Could be someone found her. Could be 3 days was enough time for her to talk to someone who actually listened. Is that what you're not saying? Silence on the line, which was answer enough. Dalton turned from the window, moving to his desk where a file lay open. Dr. Elena Voss, complete with property records, financial history, and surveillance photos. He'd done his research, as he always did. Divorced, minimal family connections, one daughter, no close friends in town, no powerful allies, no one who would miss her or make noise about her disappearance. Perfect target. Except now there was uncertainty, and uncertainty was intolerable. Find her, tonight. I don't care about the weather. Take you full team. Check the hospitals, check anyone in town who might have taken her in. Check the harbor master and the grocery store, and every single structure between where you left her and the water. And Victor, if she's alive and talking, you fix it. Permanently. No more half measures. Understood, but boss, there's something else. There's a guy. Lives in that old cabin north of town. Ex-military, Navy. Word is he might be SEAL or something close to it. Keeps to himself, but if she wandered that direction. Dalton's laugh held no warmth. You're telling me you're worried about one retired soldier. You have 4 men, all trained, all experienced. Handle it. I don't pay you to be intimidated by complications. Not intimidated, just informed. If he's what people say, he's not going to be a complication. He's going to be a problem. Then solve the problem. Dalton ended the call, tossing the phone onto his desk with more force than necessary. One soldier. Even a SEAL was just one man, and one man against 4 professionals with surprise on their side was simple mathematics. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at him. He'd built his empire on being thorough, on eliminating variables before they became threats. He pulled up another contact, this one local. Sheriff Wade Brennan answered on the second ring, voice carrying the careful deference of someone who knew exactly where his salary really came from. I need you to do a wellness check. The old Harper cabin, 3 miles north of town. Veteran named Marcus Cole. Make sure he's alone. Make sure everything's quiet. Don't engage. Just confirm and report back. In this weather, roads are barely... I didn't ask about the weather, Wade. I asked you to do your job. 1 hour. Call me back. The sheriff would comply because the sheriff always complied, because his mortgage and his mistress and his gambling debts all depended on compliance. Dalton had spent a decade building this network of obligation and compromise, ensuring that when he needed things done, there was always someone whose continued comfort depended on doing them. One marine biologist refusing to sell shouldn't have been more than a minor inconvenience. Women like Elena Voss were supposed to understand that resistance was futile, that money and power always won, that the smart play was to take the generous offer and disappear quietly. Her stubbornness had forced escalation, but escalation was fine. Examples had to be made occasionally to keep others compliant. If she'd survived, if she'd talked, if some retired soldier decided to play hero, it simply meant the example needed to be more comprehensive. Dalton had eliminated obstacles before. He'd do it again. This was just business, and business always found a way. They came at midnight, when the storm was at its apex and visibility had been reduced to almost nothing. Marcus had been expecting them hours earlier, which meant they were either being cautious or waiting for conditions that would mask their approach. Titan alerted first. Rising from his position near the door with a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards, ears forward and body rigid in the stance that meant contact imminent. Marcus killed the cabin's lights with a single switch, plunging the interior into darkness broken only by the fire's fading glow. His eyes had already adjusted, a precaution he'd taken an hour ago. He moved to Elena, pressed the loaded cig into her hands, and spoke in a whisper that barely carried over the storm. Floor, now, behind the bed. Don't move, don't make sound, don't fire unless someone gets past me and Titan. She dropped without argument, combat crawling to the position he'd indicated, and Marcus felt a moment of appreciation for her discipline. No panic, no questions, just efficient compliance. He took position at the window with the best sightline to the approach road, Remington in hand. Titan at his side, vibrating with controlled aggression. The dog knew this dance, had performed it in a dozen countries under worse conditions, and the training was holding despite months of civilian life. Vehicle lights appeared first, 2 sets approaching without sirens or emergency flashers. The lead vehicle was a sheriff's department SUV, which answered one question definitively. The corruption went exactly as deep as Elena had claimed. The second was a black Suburban with aftermarket modifications that screamed private security. Both stopped 50 yards from the cabin, far enough to be outside effective handgun range, close enough that their occupants could dismount under relatives' cover. 5 men emerged. Marcus cataloged each with the automatic assessment of someone who'd spent a career evaluating threats. The sheriff was obvious, soft around the middle, moving with the careful steps of someone unused to field operations, present for appearance rather than action. The other 4 moved differently, spreading into tactical formation with the unconscious coordination of trained operators. All carried long guns, AR platform rifles from the silhouettes. All wore dark tactical clothing and communications gear. Professional, experienced, dangerous. The sheriff approached the cabin alone. Spotlight from his SUV illuminating the front door, voice amplified through a vehicle PA system. "Marcus Cole, this is Sheriff Brennan. Need to talk to you about a missing person. Open up." Marcus didn't respond, didn't move, simply watched through the window as the 4 professionals used the sheriff's performance as cover to flank the cabin in teams of 2. Standard dynamic entry setup. Distraction at the front while the real threat moved to breach points on the sides or rear. The sheriff tried again, adding manufactured concern to his voice. "Mr. Cole, we have reason to believe Dr. Elena Voss may have sought shelter in this area. We're conducting wellness checks on all isolated residences. If you're in there, I need you to respond." Still, Marcus held position, tracking the flanking teams through windows, waiting for the moment when performance dropped and real action began. Titan's growl had gone silent, but his body remained coiled, waiting for the command that would release him. It came faster than expected. The sheriff, receiving some signal Marcus couldn't see, suddenly dropped his cooperative tone and raised his voice to something close to aggression. Both flanking teams moved. Left side, 2 men approaching the window Marcus wasn't watching. Right side, 2 more stacking on the back door. Coordinated breach in 3, 2, 1. Marcus pivoted, raised the Remington, and fired through the window at the left side team. The shotgun's roar inside the confined space was deafening, buckshot chewing through glass and frame. One attacker went down hard, his partner diving for cover and returning fire that punched holes in the cabin wall but missed Marcus by feet. "Titan, guard right." The dog exploded into motion, hitting the back door just as it crashed inward, 95 pounds of controlled aggression targeting the first man through the breach. The attacker's rifle clattered away as Titan's jaws clamped on his forearm, the dog's weight and momentum driving him backward into his partner and turning their coordinated entry into a tangle of bodies and panicked shouts. Marcus fired again, suppressing the remaining left side attacker. Then transitioned to the back door where Titan had 1 man screaming and the second trying to get a clear shot at the dog. The Remington spoke twice more, precise shots that shredded the second attacker's leg and sent him down hard. 4 seconds, 4 attackers neutralized. The math was brutal and efficient. The sheriff was screaming into his radio, backing toward his vehicle with the desperate speed of someone who'd just realized he was catastrophically out of his depth. Marcus let him go, focused instead on the cabin's interior, where the first breacher was trying to pry Titan off his arm with his remaining hand. "Titan, release." The dog let go instantly, backing 3 steps, but maintaining eye contact with the downed man, ready to re-engage on command. Marcus moved forward, kicked the man's rifle further away, and in one smooth motion zip-tied his hands behind his back, using restraints from his own belt. The man was gasping, clutching his mangled arm, face pale with shock and blood loss. Marcus checked the backdoor attacker next. The one who'd taken buckshot to the leg was unconscious, either from blood loss or pain, but alive. The one Titan had tackled was crawling toward the door, leaving a blood trail, whimpering something that might have been surrender. Outside, the sheriff's SUV was attempting a panicked 3-point turn in conditions that made precision driving nearly impossible. The Suburban's driver was shouting into his radio. The left side attacker Marcus had hit through the window wasn't moving. Marcus pulled the conscious breacher upright with one hand, slammed him against the wall with enough force to ensure his complete attention, and spoke in a voice that held all the warmth of a coffin nail. "Who sent you?" The man tried defiance first, tried to say nothing, but Marcus had interrogated harder men in worse circumstances. And he had neither time nor patience. I can have my dog finish what he started, or you can talk. Choose fast. Dalton. The name came out in a rush, fear overriding whatever loyalty or compensation had motivated him. Richard Dalton, Cascade Development. He ordered us to find the woman, kill her if she was alive, kill anyone who'd helped her. How many more? That's all of us. 4 plus the sheriff. I swear that's everyone. Marcus believed him. The panic was too genuine. The pain too overwhelming for sophisticated deception. He secured the man with additional zip ties, did the same for the unconscious attacker, then returned to the window to assess the external situation. The sheriff was gone, his SUV's taillights disappearing into the storm. The Suburban remained, driver still inside, apparently unwilling to flee and abandon his team or advance and face the same fate. A stalemate, but a temporary one. Elena emerged from behind the bed. Sig still in her hands but pointed safely at the floor, face pale but composed. Are you hit? Marcus checked himself with the automatic assessment of someone who'd learned that adrenaline masked injury. Sound nothing beyond minor cuts from flying glass. Fine. You? Terrified but functional. She looked at the zip-tied men, at the blood on the floor, at the destruction that had transformed the cabin into a battlefield in less than a minute. What now? Now I go have a conversation with the driver. Then we take everything we have, these men, their weapons, your research, all of it, and we make a phone call to someone who actually cares about the law. He moved to the door, Titan falling into position at his heel, and stopped only to deliver one final instruction to Elena. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you fire until the gun's empty. Understand? She nodded. Mazing the SIG into a decent approximation of proper stance, Marcus stepped into the storm, into the chaos of wind and rain that turned the world into a maelstrom of noise and darkness, and began walking toward the Suburban. The driver saw him coming, must have radioed something, because the vehicle suddenly lurched into motion, attempting to flee. But the road was narrow, the conditions treacherous, and panic made people stupid. The Suburban made it maybe 30 yards before sliding off the road into a ditch, wheels spinning uselessly in mud. Marcus reached the driver's door, yanked it open, and pulled the man out with the same cold efficiency he'd shown inside. This one was older, maybe 45, with the soft build of someone whose work was mostly administrative. Victor Reyes. The man's eyes went wide. How did you? Your friend inside talks when motivated. You're going to talk too. You're going to tell me everything about Dalton's operation, everyone involved, everyone compromised, every crime committed. Marcus leaned closer, letting the man see exactly what kind of individual he was dealing with. And then you're going to help me end this. Tonight. Victor Reyes broke in under 5 minutes, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about the man's loyalty to Dalton. It was transactional, not ideological. And the transaction had just shifted dramatically against him. Sitting zip-tied in Marcus's cabin, surrounded by his wounded team and the ruins of their failed operation, Reyes provided a comprehensive breakdown of Cascade Development's criminal enterprise with the eager cooperation of someone hoping cooperation might reduce consequences. Dalton had been running the same operation for a decade across 3 counties. Identify desirable coastal properties. Make generous initial offers, then systematically terrorize anyone who refused until they sold for pennies or disappeared entirely. The disappeared were rare, only 3 in 10 years, but they'd all been isolated individuals with minimal connections, people whose absence wouldn't generate sustained investigation. Elena had been slated to be number 4. The network of corruption was extensive. Sheriff Brennan received monthly payments plus a percentage of each successful acquisition. Mayor Holbrook had her campaign debts cleared in exchange for favorable zoning decisions and environmental impact waivers. County commissioners, state environmental officials, even a federal EPA inspector, all compromised through either direct payment or carefully documented blackmail material. Where's Dalton now? Marcus asked, checking the time. midnight. The assault had failed 30 minutes ago, which meant Dalton knew by now that something had gone catastrophically wrong. His office downtown, probably. He never leaves until 2 or 3 during active operations, micromanages everything. Reyes swallowed, eyeing Titan who sat 3 feet away, watching him with unblinking intensity. Look, I gave you everything. I cooperate, that counts for something, right? Reduced charges, witness protection, something? Marcus didn't answer, focused instead on the tactical problem. Dalton's office was in the center of town, top floor of the harbor building, probably with private security on site. Going after him directly would mean urban combat in a confined space against an unknown number of hostiles. It would mean risking civilian casualties, collateral damage, exactly the kind of operation that required planning and support. Except there was no time for planning, no support to call on that wasn't compromised, and every hour that passed was an hour Dalton could use to disappear or destroy evidence. Elena had been silent through the interrogation, absorbing the extent of the conspiracy that had nearly killed her. Now she spoke, voice carrying steel underneath the exhaustion. My research is backed up, but the physical evidence, water samples, soil samples, documentation, that's all at my cottage. If Dalton knows I'm alive, he'll send someone to destroy it. He's already sent everyone he has. Marcus gestured at the zip-tied men. This was his full security team. He's got no one left. He's got money. He can buy more people. By morning, he could have a dozen contractors here destroying everything that could convict him. She met Marcus's eyes with the desperate intensity of someone who'd lost too much already. We need to get there first. We need to secure the evidence, and we need to do it now. Marcus weighed the options with the cold calculus of someone who'd spent a career making life-or-death decisions with incomplete information. Splitting focus was dangerous. Going after both the evidence and Dalton simultaneously meant dividing already limited resources. But Elena was right. Without the physical evidence to corroborate her digital records, any case against Dalton became significantly weaker. Where's your cottage from here? 15 minutes south, right on the coast road. Well, it's isolated, no neighbors within a mile. Marcus made the decision. We secure your evidence first, then we deal with Dalton. He spent 10 minutes preparing, moving with the efficient speed of someone executing a rehearsed drill. The attackers were secured more thoroughly, first aid applied to prevent anyone from bleeding out before authorities arrived, weapons confiscated and stored. He left them zip-tied inside the cabin with a space heater running and the door locked from outside. Cruel, perhaps, but they'd survive until morning. Elena changed into dry clothes Marcus provided, too large but functional. He gave her a waterproof jacket, kept the SIG, and showed her how to perform a press check to confirm a round was chambered. Titan received fresh water and a handful of high-protein treats, fuel for whatever was coming next. The drive south was a nightmare of hairpin turns and flash flood conditions, the road more river than pavement in places, visibility measuring in feet rather than miles. Marcus drove with the focused intensity of someone who'd conducted vehicle operations in far worse conditions, and somehow they covered the 15 minutes without sliding off a cliff or into a ditch. Elena's cottage materialized from the storm like something from a ghost story, a compact structure of weathered shingles and salt-stained windows, perched on a rocky outcrop with the Pacific hammering at the stones below. A single light burned in an upper window, which stopped Marcus cold. "You left lights on?" "No, I never." Understanding and fear crossed her face simultaneously. Someone's inside. Marcus killed the headlights, coasted the last 100 yards to a stop behind a stand of wind-tortured pines. He studied the cottage through the rain-streaked windshield, counting windows, assessing approaches, identifying tactical problems. Single story, maybe 1,200 square feet, 2 entry points visible from this angle, probably a third at the rear. The light suggested someone was conducting a search, which meant they were distracted, focused inward rather than on external security. How many entrances total? 3, front, back, and a side door from the mudroom. Interior layout. Open concept main room, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, office space in the converted sunroom. She spoke with the clipped precision of someone forcing panic down through sheer will. All my physical samples are in the office. Field recorder with all my audio notes is in the main bedroom, hidden in the closet. Marcus pulled the SIG from his belt, handed it to Elena, and spoke with absolute authority. "You stay in the vehicle, doors locked, engine running, ready to drive if shooting starts. As I'm not back in 15 minutes, or if you see anyone except me and Titan, you drive to the nearest Coast Guard station and you tell them everything. Understand?" "I understand, but Marcus," she stopped him with a hand on his arm. "These people have already tried to kill me once. If they're in my home, they're not just destroying evidence, They're waiting in case I come back. You go in there alone, you're walking into an ambush. I've walked into worse. That's not reassuring. Marcus allowed himself. The ghost of a smile. It should be. I'm still here. He exited into the storm with Titan, both immediately drenched despite waterproof gear. The approach to the cottage required crossing 50 yards of open ground with minimal cover, but the conditions provided concealment better than any smokescreen. Marcus moved low and fast, Titan matching his pace, both covering the distance in under 30 seconds. At the side door, Marcus paused, listening over the storm. Voices inside, at least two, relaxed rather than alert. Good. They weren't expecting company. He tested the door, unlocked, which was either arrogance or stupidity, probably both. The entry was surgical. Marcus moved through the mudroom into the kitchen area, Titan ghosting behind him, both silent despite the chaos of wind and rain pounding the structure. The voices came from the office, two men, discussing which files to prioritize for destruction, arguing about whether digital deletion was sufficient or if they needed to physically burn hard drives. Marcus reached the office doorway, assessed the situation in a single glance. Two men, both 40s, casual clothes, one holding a laptop, the other sorting through physical files. Not professional security, just hired help, probably local contractors Dalton had recruited for witness intimidation and property destruction. Armed, but weapons holstered, neither expecting threat. Hands where I can see them. Don't move, don't speak, don't do anything except exactly what I tell you. Both men froze, shock rendering them briefly paralyzed. The one with the laptop actually dropped it, the device hitting the floor with a crack of breaking plastic. The second reached for his sidearm, which was the wrong choice. Titan was across the room before the man's hand touched his weapon, jaws clamping on the wrist with precision that disarmed without destroying. The man screamed, tried to pull away, succeeded only in making Titan adjust his grip. Marcus was on the second man immediately, spinning him face first into the wall, zip-tying his hands with practice speed. Titan, release, guard. The dog let go, backing away, but maintaining his position between both men and any potential escape route. Marcus secured the second man, then took a moment to assess the office damage. Files scattered, some torn. One small fire, burning in a metal trash can where they'd been systematically destroying paper records. He extinguished it with water from a coffee pot, salvaged what remained. The laptop was damaged, but potentially recoverable. The file cabinets looked intact. Water samples in a specialized refrigeration unit appeared untouched. Apparently, the contractors hadn't understood their importance. Marcus pulled the first contractor upright, the one Titan had disarmed, who was cradling his wrist and crying. Who sent you? Dalton. Jesus Christ, Dalton sent us, said there'd be no one here, said it was just a document retrieval, said, how many more coming? No one, just us. He called 2 hours ago, said it was urgent, paid us $5,000 each to come tonight and clean out anything connected to coastal research. That's all I know, I swear. Marcus believed him for the same reason he'd believed Reyes. The fear was too genuine, too overwhelming. These weren't hardened criminals. They were opportunists who'd taken easy money for what they thought was simple work, and instead found themselves facing consequences they'd never imagined. He secured both men to the office radiator, immobilizing them but leaving them warm and dry. They'd survive here until authorities arrived, though their immediate futures looked decidedly grim. Marcus made the phone call from Elena's cottage at 1:30 in the morning. Using a number he'd sworn he'd never use again, it rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered with the cautious alertness of someone accustomed to middle-of-the-night emergencies. This is Agent Chen. David, it's Marcus Cole. A pause, then recognition and something that might have been relief. Marcus, Jesus, it's been what, 8 months? I heard you went dark after Kandahar. Where are you? Oregon coast, small town called Crescent Bay. I need federal intervention, and I need it yesterday. David Chen had served with Marcus for 6 years before transitioning to the FBI's Portland field office, one of the few people Marcus trusted without reservation. They'd saved each other's lives enough times that explaining the current situation didn't require extensive preamble or justification. Marcus laid out the facts in concise tactical briefing format. Attempted murder of federal witness, conspiracy involving local law enforcement, environmental crimes, evidence of multiple homicides, corrupt officials, and one very wealthy sociopath who believed himself untouchable. I've got 6 suspects secured. Physical evidence, digital records, and one very determined marine biologist who's willing to testify to everything. But the primary target, Richard Dalton, CEO of Cascade Development, is still mobile and still dangerous. He knows his operation is blown. By dawn, he could be in the wind with resources to disappear permanently. Chen absorbed this with the professional calm of someone who'd handled complex cases before. Crescent Bay is outside my immediate jurisdiction, but environmental crimes involving federal waters fall under joint FBI-EPA authority. I can have a team there by 0600. That's 4.5 hours. Can you hold the situation that long? I can hold it, but I need more than just a team. I need arrest warrants, seizure authority, and enough bodies to lock down the entire operation before anyone else disappears or evidence gets destroyed. Give me 20 minutes to make calls. I'll coordinate with EPA Criminal Division and get U.S. Marshals involved for the arrest warrants. Marcus. Chen paused, choosing words carefully. Are you solid? You good to hold this together? Marcus looked at Elena, who was carefully cataloging her salvaged research with the focused intensity of someone refusing to let trauma derail purpose. He looked at Titan, who sat watching the secured contractors with patient vigilance. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders, the same weight he'd carried through a dozen combat deployments, and realized something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was trained to do. I'm solid. Make your calls. The next 3 hours were spent in careful preparation. Marcus photographed everything: the secured suspects, the evidence, the damaged property, the weapons. Elena provided detailed written statements, documented her research, created redundant backups of all digital files. They worked in efficient silence, both understanding that the case against Dalton would be won or lost based on the quality of evidence presented. At 4:30, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Chen. Team en route. Warrants secured. Marshals moving on primary target at 0600. Hold position. At 5:15, the first federal vehicles appeared on the coast road. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, followed by a mobile command unit, followed by 2 more vehicles carrying EPA criminal investigators in tactical gear. David Chen emerged from the lead vehicle, somehow looking fresh, despite the hour and the conditions, and Marcus felt something uncomfortably close to relief. They met on Elena's porch, rain still hammering, but the worst of the storm finally beginning to break. Chen extended his hand, and Marcus shook it, the gesture carrying weight beyond simple greeting. Hell of a situation you've got here. Hell of a situation I inherited. The woman inside nearly died stopping these people. Everything after that was just cleanup. Chen smiled slightly. 6 armed suspects secured, single-handedly in less than 12 hours. You call that cleanup? I call it Tuesday. The next hour was organized chaos as federal agents processed the scene, collected evidence, transported secured suspects, and coordinated with the U.S. Marshals team preparing to arrest Dalton. Elena gave her formal statement to 2 EPA investigators who treated her with the respect due a federal witness rather than a victim, which Marcus noted seemed to give her strength. At 6:05, Chen's radio crackled with the words everyone had been waiting for. Primary target in custody, no resistance, securing premises now. Richard Dalton had been arrested at his waterfront office, apparently still present at 6 in the morning. Either too arrogant to believe the law would actually reach him, or too focused on damage control to consider flight. The marshals found him attempting to delete files from his personal computer, surrounded by shredded documents, in the process of systematically destroying evidence. They also found something more valuable, a safe containing financial records documenting every bribe, every payment, every corrupt transaction spanning 10 years. By 8 o'clock, as dawn finally broke through dissipating storm clouds, the full scope of the operation was becoming clear. Sheriff Brennan had been arrested at his home. Mayor Holbrook was taken into custody at Town Hall. 3 county commissioners, 2 state officials, and 1 federal EPA inspector were all facing charges. The corruption had been even more extensive than Elena's research had suggested, touching nearly every level of local and regional government. Marcus stood on Elena's porch, watching federal agents work with the efficient precision of people who knew their jobs, and felt the familiar post-mission exhaustion beginning to settle in. Titan leaned against his leg. the pressure familiar and comforting. Chen joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee that had materialized from somewhere in the federal vehicle convoy. Thought you might need this. Marcus accepted gratefully, the heat from the cup welcome against hands that had forgotten what warm felt like. What happens now? Now, we process evidence, build cases, prepare for trials that'll probably take 2 years. Dalton's looking at RICO charges, conspiracy to commit murder, environmental crimes that carry serious federal time. He's done. His company's done. Everyone in his network is done. Chen sipped his own coffee, studying Marcus. You did good work here. Clean, documented. Exactly the kind of intervention that makes prosecution easy. You ever think about coming back? Not military, but federal law enforcement. FBI could use someone with your skill set. Marcus shook his head. I'm done with organizations, done with chains of command, done with missions. That's not what the last 12 hours looked like. The last 12 hours looked like a man protecting someone who needed protection. That's different. Is it? Chen let the question hang for a moment, then shifted topics. Dr. Voss is asking for you. Thought you should know. Marcus found Elena in what had been her office, now transformed into a federal evidence processing center. She looked small among the agents and equipment, but her spine was straight and her eyes were clear. When she saw Marcus, something shifted in her expression. Relief, gratitude, and something more complex. They tell me it's over. That Dalton's in custody, that everyone involved is being charged, that I'm safe. She spoke carefully, as if testing the words for truth. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell me there's a technicality, that he's too rich or too connected, that justice doesn't actually work. Justice is working. It'll take time, but it's working. Because of you. She stepped closer, and Marcus saw tears tracking down her face, though her voice remained steady. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. You were trying to leave all of this behind, but you saved my life anyway. You risked everything to stop them. Why? Marcus thought about Kandahar, about the men he'd lost, about the mission that had broken something fundamental inside him. He thought about 8 months of isolation, trying to outrun ghosts that followed everywhere. He thought about Titan's judgment, about the moment he'd decided that walking away wasn't possible, that some fights chose you regardless of what you wanted. Because it was the right thing to do, because you needed help and I could provide it. Because, he paused, finding words for something he'd only recently understood himself. Because maybe being a warrior isn't about the organization you serve or the wars you fight. Maybe it's about standing up when someone needs you to stand, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's dangerous, especially then. Elena reached out, took his hand in both of hers. It spoke with quiet intensity. Thank you, for my life, for my daughter's safety, for proving that good people still exist. She hesitated, then asked the question he'd known was coming. Will you stay in Crescent Bay? Sophie would like to meet you. The town will need time to heal from this, and having someone like you here. I don't know, Marcus answered honestly. I came here to be alone, to figure out who I am without the war. Past 12 hours showed me I'm still the same person I always was, which is both comforting and terrifying. The person you are saved my life and brought down a criminal empire in one night. That's someone this town could use. Marcus didn't answer, looking instead at Titan, who looked back with those amber eyes that had seen him through the worst and best moments of his life. The dog's tail wagged once, slowly, which might have been approval or might have been simple contentment that the mission was complete. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the same cliff where Titan had found Elena Voss and watched the Pacific perform its endless assault on the Oregon coast. The storms had passed, replaced by the tentative sunshine of early spring, though the ocean remained gray and restless. The Harper cabin behind him had been repaired, the bullet holes patched, the blood cleaned, the shattered windows replaced. It looked almost peaceful now, as if violence had never touched it. Almost. Marcus had stayed, though he still wasn't entirely certain why. The initial reason had been practical. Federal prosecutors needed him available for depositions, testimony preparation, the endless machinery of building cases against Dalton and his network. But depositions had concluded weeks ago, and still Marcus remained, finding reasons that became increasingly transparent even to himself. The town had changed in ways both obvious and subtle. Sheriff Brennan's department had been dissolved, replaced by state police oversight until new elections could be held. Mayor Holbrook's office sat empty, the city council operating under emergency protocols. Cascade Development had collapsed into bankruptcy, its assets seized, its projects halted permanently. 3 other families had come forward with stories of intimidation and violence, emboldened by Elena's courage and Dalton's arrest. The scope of corruption had been even wider than anyone had imagined, touching nearly every aspect of coastal development across the region. Richard Dalton himself sat in federal detention, awaiting trial on 43 separate charges. His lawyers had attempted bail, arguing that a man of his standing and resources represented no flight risk, but the judge had disagreed. Dalton would remain behind bars until trial, scheduled for next fall. The evidence against him was overwhelming: financial records, testimony from former associates who'd turned prosecution witnesses, and Elena's meticulously documented research. Conviction was considered inevitable. The only question was whether he'd receive 30 years or life. Marcus felt no satisfaction at this, only a quiet sense that balance had been restored. Justice wasn't revenge, it was simply accountability, delayed but finally arrived. Behind him, footsteps approached on the trail, accompanied by the lighter sounds of smaller feet and the excited panting of Titan returning from his patrol. Marcus turned to see Elena and Sophie, both bundled against the spring wind, both smiling in ways that still seemed new and fragile, like people relearning how to feel safe. Sophie was 9 years old, small for her age, with dark curly hair and her mother's gray eyes. She'd been selectively mute when Marcus first met her, communication limited to drawings and gestures. Trauma from her father's abandonment and then her mother's disappearance locked somewhere deep inside where words couldn't reach. But therapy and safety and time had begun to work their gentle magic, and now she spoke occasionally, carefully, testing each word before releasing it. She ran ahead of Elena now, Titan loping beside her with the patient tolerance of a war dog who discovered that protecting children was perhaps the most important mission he'd ever received. When she reached Marcus, she stopped, suddenly shy, and held out a folded piece of paper. "I made this. For you." Marcus accepted it with the careful reverence the moment deserved, unfolding it to reveal a drawing executed in colored pencil with surprising skill. It showed a man and a dog standing on a cliff, a cabin behind them, sun breaking through storm clouds above. In the corner, in careful letters, "Thank you for bringing my mom home." Something tight in Marcus's chest, something that had been clenched since Kandahar, loosened fractionally. He knelt to Sophie's level, meeting those gray eyes that were finally beginning to look like a child's eyes instead of someone far older. "You're welcome, Sophie. I'm glad I could help." She smiled then, quick and bright, before running back toward the cliff edge where Titan had discovered something fascinating in the tide pools below. Elena watched her daughter with the expression of someone witnessing a miracle in real time. "She's getting better, stronger. The therapist says she's processing the trauma in healthy ways, that she'll be okay eventually." Elena moved to stand beside Marcus, both watching Sophie explore with Titan as vigilant guardian. "I don't think that happens without you, without knowing that someone came when it mattered, that someone stood between her and the people who wanted to hurt her mother. I just did what needed doing." The sheriff certainly wasn't going to help. The mayor was part of the problem. "If you hadn't been here, if Titan hadn't found me, I'd be dead, and Sophie would be—" her voice broke slightly, steadied. "She'd be orphaned, or worse. Dalton doesn't leave loose ends." Marcus didn't argue because she was right. The evidence they'd found after Dalton's arrest had included contingency plans for Sophie's elimination if Elena's death had raised too many questions. The casual brutality of it. The cold calculation that a 9-year-old child was simply another problem to be solved still made Marcus's hands want to form fists. "How's your research coming?" Elena's face brightened, the shadow passing. "Good. Amazing, actually. The EPA offered me a contract position, documenting the environmental damage from Dalton's projects and developing remediation plans. It's 2 years of work, well-funded, Exactly the kind of applied research I'd hoped to do. We can stay here. Sophie can have stability, and I can actually make a difference. She paused. What about you? Agent Chen mentioned the FBI offer. Are you considering it? Marcus had been considering it, actually, more than he'd expected to. Chen had called twice, each time with more details, better terms, increasing urgency. The FBI needed people with his skill set, needed experienced operators who understood violence but weren't ruled by it, needed men who could be trusted with difficult situations in gray areas where policy manuals provided no guidance. I don't know. Part of me wants to say yes, wants that structure and purpose again. Another part remembers why I left, remembers that organizations fail and good men die because of it. And which part is winning? Neither. Both. Marcus smiled slightly at the contradiction. I'm not the same person who came here 8 months ago. I thought isolation would heal me. Instead, it just gave the ghosts more room to operate. Turns out I heal better when I'm useful, when I'm protecting people who need protection. But I don't know if that means joining another organization or finding my own way. Sophie called from the tide pools, excited about a starfish, and Titan barked once, sharing her enthusiasm. The sound carried on the wind, bright and uncomplicated. The sound of a child being allowed to be a child again. Elena touched Marcus's arm lightly. Whatever you decide, you'll always be welcome here. Sophie asks about you constantly. She wants to know if Titan can teach her dog handling, if you'll show her how to identify birds, if you'll come to her school presentation on coastal ecosystems. She laughed softly. I think you might have accidentally acquired a family, whether you plan to or not. Marcus felt that tightness in his chest loosen another degree, felt something worn and unexpected take its place. Family. He'd lost one family in Kandahar, lost brothers who'd been closer than blood, lost the certainty of purpose and belonging. He'd spent 8 months believing that loss was permanent, that he was meant to be alone with his ghosts and his guilt. But maybe families weren't just about blood or uniform. Maybe they were about showing up when it mattered, about standing between innocence and those who'd harm it, about choosing to care, even when caring meant risking more pain. I'd like that, he said quietly. The bird identification, the school presentation, all of it. Elena smiled, bright and genuine, the smile of someone who'd faced death and come through stronger. Good, because Sophie's already planning a birthday party next month, and you're at the top of the invite list. They stood together, watching Sophie and Titan explore, watching the ocean perform its endless dance, watching the sun break through clouds that had seemed permanent just months before. The world kept turning, carrying them forward into futures they couldn't predict, but no longer feared. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Chen. New situation developing in Washington state. Missing hiker, corrupt local officials. Looks familiar. Could use your perspective. Interested? Marcus read it twice, felt the old instinct to respond, to mobilize, to move toward the sound of guns. But he also felt something new. The knowledge that he had time, had options, had people who cared whether he came back. He could say yes or no, could choose his missions instead of having them chosen for him. He typed back, send details, I'll review and advise. Then he pocketed the phone and returned his attention to the cliff, the ocean, the child and dog exploring tide pools. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not forgetting the past or escaping the violence, but integrating it into something larger. Not running from who he was, but choosing how to be that person in ways that built instead of destroyed, protected instead of punished, healed instead of hurt. Titan barked again, joyful and free, and Sophie laughed, the sound carrying on the wind like music. Marcus smiled, feeling something close to peace, and realized that maybe he found what he'd been searching for all along. Not isolation from the fight, but the right fight. Not escape from purpose, but purpose worth embracing. Not freedom from duty, but duty freely chosen. Because somewhere out there, someone would always need protection. Someone would always be standing between innocence and those who'd destroy it. And when that call came, when duty whispered instead of shouted, maybe he'd answer. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. Because that's what warriors did when they finally came home. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to remember that good people still exist, that courage still matters, that one person willing to stand can change everything. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Marcus's situation? Where are you watching from? We love hearing from you. May you find the courage to stand when standing matters. May you protect those who cannot protect themselves. May you always answer when duty calls. Until the next story, stay safe, stay strong, and remember that heroes walk among us, often unseen, always ready. God bless.